So the other day, a guy drops off these exhaust tips. They're billet aluminum for an R1. Getting replacements is ridiculously expensive, and it's also very hard to find. So the repair is in my hands. I had to take it from this to this. And here's how I did it. The first step into fixing all of this is to get rid of the stuff we don't want to mess with. So in this case, I have a boss that's sticking up on top of there, and we're not going to mess around with repairing like an existing section of it that's like maybe it's enough, maybe it's not. We're just going to cut it all off. So everything that is the normal size or normal thickness on that boss, I'm going to keep. Everything else I'm going to get rid of. To get rid of it, just a cut-off wheel on the end of a grinder. But pay very, very close attention here. I'm cutting just above the base where that boss is starting to come out of there because I don't want to scratch it. I don't want to add any more things that I have to repair or anything else like that. I'm just going to keep a little bit of that lip on there. And the cutoff wheel is more than enough to get into it. A heavy knotted wire wheel on the end of my grinder is what's next. This gets into all the little crevices and all the little tiny spaces and stuff like that to remove all that coating or paint or powder or whatever it is and brighten the metal back up. We have to have bright metal to weld to. The wire wheel also helps get rid of any burrs or any kind of extra junk that's sitting on there and, just kind of preps it up, gets it all ready for you. You could do all this with a file or some sandpaper or whatever the case is. Next up is a flap disc. The flap disc is going to add a bevel to the existing boss. The bevel is going to allow me to blend the new weld into it, increasing my surface area. It also increases the strength of the entire piece once finished. Finally, I'm going to grab my drill with a little whirly wire wheel, and that'll clean up the inside and brighten it all back up. In order to keep the walls from collapsing in on themselves as we weld over all of this, we need something to kind of hold the place of it. Now, this piece of steel was machined down to fit the inside diameter of that boss, and then inside of that, an aluminum slug to help dissipate the heat. Now, aluminum does not stick to steel, and we're going to fill all of this section back up with aluminum. We're not going to worry about cutting a piece out to match it or anything else like that, and I'll show you exactly why here as soon as we get done filling it up. But one of the great difficulties of working on a small piece is that my head was either in the way or it was out of focus until right about here. This is what I'm doing. We're just building up the edges on this a little bit. Now, some people were like, okay, that's going to take forever. That's going to, use so many consumables and everything else like that. But realistically speaking, after I did all of this footage and tallied it all up and everything else like that, I spent 22 minutes welding. That's actually not very long. Here's a much better shot. You can see on this side where I'm actually building it up. We're running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's all we're doing just to fill this sucker back in. Now, one of the trickier parts to working with aluminum like this is that it's not the runniest stuff in the world. It's more like snot. So you have to burn it pretty hot. And in order for it to flow and really kind of take the shape of that slug and maintain that inside diameter as well as be kind of structurally sound, because this is now more like a casting process, whereas the piece that we're welding to is a machined billet piece. So you have to get it kind of hot, you have to get it kind of muddy, and you have to let it blend in. So we're not worried about like stacking up like beautiful dimes and stuff, and we have to concentrate all of our heat on the actual aluminum portion itself and not the steel. Now, if you let the arc jump over to the steel and it creates a little pit or something like that where it's not going to stick together, but it will want to try and take that section of the aluminum, will try to melt into that cavity, that's going to create a mechanical lock and make it really difficult to get that piece out. So make sure you're concentrating your arc entirely on the aluminum and not the steel. Take a look at this contour real quick here. You notice that the boss itself kind of matches that base or extends or protrudes into that contour, or they become one piece. That's because this was one piece. So this piece is the back side that we're looking at here, or the bottom side that wasn't messed up. And you notice that it kind of goes up above and beyond. There's a radius that goes into that. Now I have to build all of the metal back up to match that contour once I grind it all back down. So a few quick dabs, just a couple of beads over the top of it, just to build up and make it a little bit thicker so that I have plenty to remove and shape it all and fill it all back in. Now, once I was finished and I pulled the slug out, this is what it looks like. Notice that it matches nice and clean, and the aluminum did flow quite well to get inside of there. While that cooled off, I started working on the second piece. Now the second piece wasn't nearly as bad as the first one. There was a bit of eroding where it was kind of worn out, but it wasn't bad enough to merit me chopping it all off and building it back up. I could get the torch inside of there just enough to get a couple of beads in to kind of pad it all up. Unfortunately, the camera doesn't fit in there, and I forgot to take a picture of it to begin with, so here it is like halfway through where I realized, oh crap, I need to get a picture of that. Again, not nearly as bad. It just needed a little bit of fill on those eroded sections to get the tube back in there after you grind it all back down and fit nice and snug. Piece of cake. Getting just the right contour is going to have to be done by hand. This does not fit in a lathe. There's no other way to actually spin it down or anything else like that. Trust me. It doesn't happen. So since it has to be done by hand, I stuck a flap disc style sanding drum in the end of my air grinder. I'm going to knock all of the high spots down as best as I can and get it as close to round as possible, concentrating all of my energy or all my force onto the weld itself, not the spot that doesn't need to be ground down. Once I can get the tube to fit in there relatively snug, I'm going to give it a swirl and it's going to show me where all of my high spots are. Then I can go back in and just very delicately hit those high spots and get this thing to get right back into shape. So I want it to be nice and snug, but I don't want those big high spots in it. It just takes a little bit of finesse. To tackle the outside shape, I'm going to start with the grinder with a flap disc on it. But I'm going to go very, very light here. Let the flap disc do the work, not your muscles. This is going to give me kind of a general shape, not anything that's going to, get very precise or anything else like that. I don't want to knock too much of it down either. I just want to see exactly where we're at and how well it blends, and then I'm going to go back over it with the sanding drum or the flapper drum that's on my air grinder. Now this is all just a little bit of, like I mentioned before, finesse. It takes a little bit of time. You got to know where to press down, where not to, but you're basically trying to eliminate all those high spots in each one of the welds. Try a couple of different angles while you're at it. Never really hurts. To give it that real definition, I waited until the sanding drum was actually down to a smaller diameter or worn out, because that'll allow me to get into that little section of the contour where it dips in, and I got it to chase out pretty well after that. In order to get down into the edges, I used a piece of emery cloth. This also helps to take down some of the high spots from the sanding or some of the grinding marks on it. It just adds a lot of uniformity. That little extra kick down into the edges, I grabbed a hold of my file and really chased it out of there. I wanted to blend it in as best as possible, like it was still machined that way and not repaired. I then noticed a little bit of a high spot with one of the welds, so I simply went back over it with the sanding drum again and just kind of knocked it down, blended it all in, and after that we had our general shape. Facing it off is easily done with a disc sander. Now, didn't take a whole lot because this is really soft aluminum, but with that we're left with a couple of edges, some burrs. So the outside of it I'm going to tackle with a sanding disc, just kind of hold it at an angle, throw a little bit of a taper, a little bit of a bevel on there so it's not so sharp. And the inside section of it, I'm just going to grab my little deburr tool, my little whirly gig, some people call it a swizzle stick, whatever you want to call it, and we'll scrape that one out. This I'm going to have a pretty big chamfer or taper on it, just so that way it makes it a lot easier for the factory tube to slide back onto it. So as soon as I give it a couple more test fits and ensure that I like it, that's pretty much it. Now here's the two of them side by side, before on the left, right as the after. Not too bad. Now I realize I didn't show you the finishing of the second piece because it's like exactly like the first piece. So here's a shot of them side by side after. Total build time for this, 1.5 hours. And yeah, I actually made a couple extra bucks because it took 1.36 hours or something like that. So yeah, it's really that quick. I appreciate you watching.